Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is lesson. And today's verb was suggested by the viewer Louise, so thank you so much for this great idea. Let's take a look at what this verb means. Lesson really only has one definition, and it's to either make something less or for something to become less. Everybody should know that lesson is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all you need to do is add ing to form lessening. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding ed. Our base verb, lesson, ends in a voiced sound. Our letter N makes that voiced sound. So this means our ed ending is just going to make a D sound. And I'm not going to add an extra syllable when I say the past tense or participle forms of the verb. So our past tense and participle forms should sound like this. Lessened, lessened. Okay. Now, we just have one phrasal verb that we might encounter, and that is to lessen up. Again, the meaning here is pretty similar to our main definition of the verb. So when people use lessen up, they might be talking about reducing the intensity of something, the degree of something, or the amount. Okay. I heard an example very similar to this in the last week. Someone asked, when will the rain lessen up? So at the moment that person was speaking, it was raining extremely hard, right? Might be even like hard to drive in. It was a real downpour of a storm. And so this person wanted to know, when would the intensity reduce, or when would it decrease? Now, let's continue using our verb of the day in a couple different verb tenses. Today, we'll talk about the simple past tense and the simple future. We'll start with the simple past tense. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions at a known point in the past. Sometimes there are time signals in our sentences. This could be a word like yesterday. It could be a specific date or time in the past. It might be a phrase like 3 weeks ago or something similar, but not all simple past tense sentences will have those time signals. That can be implied as part of a conversation or as part of a passage where we've sort of already noted that something occurred at a known point. So the nice thing about making sentences in the simple past tense is that our structure stays the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, we're going to start with our subject, and then we're going to use the ed form of this regular verb. You can see that in my example. The public service announcements lessened the stigma associated with seeking help for depression. So here, public service announcements. This could be things you hear on the radio, commercials, you see on TV, even signs, billboards, right? And we're saying it kind of reduced that, like, oh dear, something's wrong with that person when it comes to that particular mental health issue, right? More people are just like, yeah, a lot of people struggle with that. Now, if I want to make a negative simple past tense sentence, our structure for that is to start with our subject, use did not, and then the base verb. So notice I'm not using the ed form of the negative here. Let's take a look at another example. The cloudy weather didn't lessen the enthusiasm and excitement for the eclipse. Okay. A solar eclipse just happened a few months ago in North America. And in some communities, the weather wasn't perfect or it wasn't ideal for it. But this sentence is describing that people's excitement, their enthusiasm to witness this event did not decrease. It was not reduced. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, I start with did, then I'm going to have my subject, and then the base verb. So again, no ed form of the verb. The only time I'm using that ed form is in the affirmative. Let's take a look at another example. Did cataract surgery lessen the risk for dementia in the study? So here we're talking about a research study, maybe a clinical trial of some kind, where doctors, medical researchers are looking at what things, or in this case, what kind of procedure. This would be like surgery on one's eyes. We want to know, did it reduce the risk for dementia? Now let's move on and make some sentences in the simple future. Today we're going to focus on making sentences with will. Will is very common as people make predictions, a guess about what they think will happen in the future. It is also used with promises and offers, and sometimes people use it to discuss their plans as well. They might be a little less confident in those plans if they're kind of mindfully choosing that will. Now, the nice thing about making sentences in the simple future with will is, again, our pattern stays the same no matter what our subject is. So in the affirmative, we're going to have our subject, we're going to use will, and then the base verb. You can see that in the example. Green tea will lessen joint pain and stiffness. Okay, so here someone is maybe making a bit of a prediction or promise. Could be a little bit of both, depending on who is saying this. Right, might be somebody who's trying to sell it to you, is kind of making that promise in order to get you to purchase it. Now let's talk about negative simple future sentences. To do this, we start with our subject, right? We're going to use will not, and then the base verb. Okay. Now, something that gets a little confusing for people is we can combine will not into the contraction, and that contraction is spelled W-O-N apostrophe T. It's pronounced with a long O sound, won't, won't. So you'll see that in my example sentence. We've had a lot of rainfall lately, but it won't lessen our region's long-term drought conditions. Okay, so drought, a period where there's below average rainfall, can have a really negative impact on farmers and their ability to grow crops. Now, let's look at making our yes or no question in the simple future. To do this, we're going to start with will, we're going to have our subject, and then the base verb. Here's my last example. Will these new hiring rules lessen the employee shortage? So here, maybe a company is providing some new rules. Maybe the rules are not as strict as they once were. So we want to know, is it going to reduce the problem we have of not having enough employees? Now, let's move on and talk about some words that are related to our verb less. And we're going to focus first on talking about the word less. Less can be used as a determiner or as a pronoun, and generally when we do that, we're talking about something, or we're using this word to indicate that there is a smaller amount of something or not as much of something as before. An example of how you might hear this used: the less work you do, the worse you'll do on the test. Heard many teachers say things like this, trying to motivate people, right? So you might hear it said the other way, kind of the opposite. The more you do, the better you will do on the test. But sometimes people feel like they can convince others with the consequences or the negative piece of it. Now, less can also be an adverb. The meaning here, to a smaller extent. Again, not as much. Let's take a look at this adverb in a sentence. This project is less important and less time sensitive than the others. Okay, we've got two adverbs there. Those adverbs are describing the adjectives important and time sensitive. And we're saying just not as much of those qualities or characteristics. Less can also be used as a preposition. Many times people use it to talk about a figure or an amount before they subtract something else. An example of this: they earned $1,000 less tax. Okay, so what we're saying here is this is how much money they made, but that's not exactly how much they received, right? We had to subtract maybe employment taxes, income taxes, etc. One last word that I thought it might be good for us to discuss today, and it's another word that has the same pronunciation but a different spelling and a different meaning. I want to make sure we don't confuse Lessen with Lesson. That on ending for lesson is a noun, right? And you've probably heard it if you've ever been a student. So we can talk about a lesson being a thing learned from teaching or experience. So an example of this: the students requested a lesson on the names of car parts. This is something that happened recently in one of my classes. This topic came up and people said, I would really love to know more. And goodness, there are so many things to talk about on the inside, the outside, under the hood of a car. But hopefully my students have now learned these things from the experience of my teaching. Thanks again to Louise for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.